Are you an overwhelmed SaaS founder ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those you don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where our listeners are known to put a little drop of super glue in their earbuds before they begin listening to each episode, because they don't want to miss one. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you scale and exit on your terms and love creating a business and serving clients all along the way while you do it. Well, speaking of not missing something important, our guest today is the founder of a communication SaaS platform that helps people not miss important events in their lives, like court dates. The idea is brilliant, multilingual, and execution is exceptional. It's a tool that's super helpful to avoid, we'll say, unnecessary legal complications. Now, most of our listeners know that there are 3 constants in life: death, taxes, and software bugs showing up where you least expect them. But, fear not, in this ever-evolving landscape of code and commerce, there is still opportunity at every turn, and that's pretty fun too. The more I do this, the more I realize that there is a SaaS solution for literally every problem that someone can think of. Savvy business people know that staying ahead of the curve is a key to success, and with the right tools in your toolbox, you can be absolutely unstoppable. From customer relationship management to supply chain optimization and AI-generated content now. The possibilities are endless. 21st century entrepreneurs have to be visionaries. Go back, say, 100 years. When Henry Ford designed the Model T, it wasn't just an improvement on the Model S or an improvement on their biggest success to date, the Model N before that. It was an improvement on the horse and buggy, but it was made affordable by the invention of the assembly line. And Henry had to be a real visionary to pull that off, just like I think today's modern entrepreneurs do. Following the Model T was the Model A. And I know A comes after T, right? That was just supposed to be Model U, you would think, right? But no, Model A. And that was because A was such a revolutionary upgrade from the current Model T that Ford just wanted to start over because it was all new. It was so different. It's a brilliant marketer. But I think the SaaS landscape changes like that too. It changes so fast. It's like the new Model T is suddenly old, and it's upstaged with the new Model A every quarter, every month. And sometimes it feels like maybe even every week, Vision and creativity can't come from AI, at least not yet. And I would argue probably never. It certainly helps and can provide prompts and ideas, and it's something, to look at and use. But vision, true vision, comes from founders like you. So keep iterating, keep making new things so that T isn't good enough anymore. Make it such a leap forward that you have to rename it to A and start all over again because it's so revolutionary. The opportunity to displace old legacy solutions is all around us. The difference today, I think, is that legacy may be 5 years old, not 30 years old. Vision is more important now than ever. So see it, recognize it, dream it, and create it. This is your time. Today's episode is sponsored by SaaS Open. Join 1,000 plus SaaS leaders, get an inside look at the future of software, and spend some time with the people that are making it happen. There'll be 5 stages with valuable content delivered in short 20-minute segments, specifically built for SaaS founders, CMOs, heads of product sales, and engineering. The best way to predict the future is take some of that vision and create it. So come do that with us March 16th and 17th in New York City. I'll be there. I'm speaking. I would love to meet you. We're also hosting a dinner get-together called We Love Bootstrappers while we're there. So get full details at saasopen.com, but come join us and hang out and spend some time with other creative founders just like you. In last week's episode, we talked with the SaaS CFO himself, Ben Murray. Ben will also be at SaaS Open. Be great to see him again. He provided great financial info and what and when we need to prepare to raise or exit, and the latest insight into metrics that matter in 2023. It's a great episode. Our founder prior to that, a week ago today, was Drew D'Agostino, founder and CEO of Crystal, a personality data platform that helps businesses understand their customers and build more emotionally intelligent sales teams. Very cool stuff. It's the kind of insight and communication that makes clients fall in love with your SaaS. If you missed either one of those, Ben or Drew, super glue your earbuds in and go binge them now. Don't miss out. Well, again, missing out. That is what today's episode is about. My guest this week, Ibrahim Aissam, founder and CEO of CourtDate, the multilingual communication platform for justice. It's a SaaS platform that makes our justice system more friendly, equitable, and efficient. It's easy to forget or miss an appointment. And a court date is one of those really important appointments, right? Even a deadline for something silly like a traffic ticket can escalate into a legal nightmare if you don't follow the instructions, you don't show up on time, you don't do your thing. And Ibrahim saw a need and created an elegant solution to level the playing field. So welcome a warrior for justice, Ibrahim Aissam. Well, hey, Ibrahim, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Well, tell us about eCourtDate.com. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, I came up with the idea when it's really difficult. If let's say, imagine you get a traffic ticket from the court, and just to be able to pay it, or just knowing the steps if you want to challenge it, or when the court date is, and if you miss that court date, the consequences. And I had firsthand experience with that when I was younger. And I worked with government users throughout my career before eCourtDate, and I realized that local governments have a problem sometimes communicating with local users.
That happens a lot. Yeah, the systems are not user-friendly really at all, if there even are systems.
If there even are systems, or if the systems are outdated using, pre-digital processes.
Right.
Then things take a lot longer, cost a lot longer, a lot more friction than necessary. And that's also on the government part. Sometimes they're locked in, so to speak, with vendor lock-in that we would never accept as a regular citizen if we're using our own Xbox or PlayStation or laptop or whatever. We're not going to have some kind of vendor lock-in that locks us into a 10-year or 20-year contract. Some of our local governments have been locked in because they signed at a time when there were less technology options. They're using more outdated software than we have on some tech that's on Mars. It's crazy.
Yeah, sad but true. And that happens a lot. Get locked into long-term contracts or something that somebody signed a long time ago, and technology has advanced but has left the government behind.
Unfortunately, that's the reality in a lot of cases, and others not. It's not always the government is the loser or the follower in technology. Sometimes they're the leader and the developer.
Yeah, that's really good. How did you get into the government space? I mean, that seems like a really tough nut to crack.
It can be. I think the perspective and your goals as a business are different. It's a different ballgame. It's a different environment. Of course, if you're a large corporation, you can essentially create different divisions within your company to serve your government users. And there's plenty of large enterprises that make substantial revenue and substantial margins from their government users.
They're the ones that are locking the government in for years and years, right?
Well, may be the case, but regardless, you can't say that it can't. The market doesn't exist, or the potential for a sustainable, profitable business doesn't exist.
Well, if anybody can do it, an entrepreneur certainly can.
Yes, agreed. Exactly. And can do better, I hope.
Oh, without a doubt. So, bootstrapped entrepreneur, and which I absolutely love, that built a great company. How did you get into the government space? How did you crack that nut? How are you able to get in and really differentiate yourself when there are big players out there trying to keep other ones out?
I think the traditional approach for at least the software startups, at least maybe not in unless you're Theranos, not in sectors that are medical or high sensitivity or critical sectors. The approach is MVP, minimum viable product, build it fast, get feedback, iterate on that feedback, and essentially deliver a buggy, or maybe not necessarily buggy, but a limited value product to your users and start from there. That doesn't work with government users. And it creates a requirement where you essentially have to be ready before they even know they're ready for their particular feature. And so that you're seen as a capable and reliable and if they integrate or if they use your product, then in a way you become an agent of the government, and you need to have a certain level of reliability, usability, accessibility that you can't take the minimum viable approach with.
That's interesting. So how do you build a product and really go to market with a mature product?
I wouldn't say you go to market with a mature product, and I wouldn't say our approach has not necessarily been the ideal approach. Of course, there's been challenges. I haven't been able to. We launched the first production product Jan 1, like midnight January, or 1 a.m. January 1st, 2020. And we had a more limited product in 2019. With COVID, I haven't been able to A/B test to identify whether our challenges have been aggravated or reduced, or we have our own, as everyone has had unique challenges throughout COVID. That's when we were starting, and so our strategy then was to not go the MVP approach. Instead, we essentially went top level approach. We checked, whenever a government agency wants to procure new services, at least above a certain threshold. Usually that's about 10,000 in the US for a local government agency. Sometimes it could be above 50,000. Above a certain threshold, they have to do a public bid.
Okay.
Of course, there's loopholes and exceptions, and they can do sole source, and there's that's where there's opportunity for complaints and of corruption. But otherwise, in general, it's they do a public competitive bid where they offer anyone who's at least minimally qualified. The nice thing when these RFPs are issued, actually, it depends on the government agency. They're not always well scoped out and well defined.
Happens a lot,
but in many cases, they are, and it can provide you a good template for what would be the minimum viable product for your customer.
Okay.
Not what would be the minimum viable product for your team as a development, because that does not necessarily always go hand in hand. And so that's the approach we took. We developed the first versions of our products for really the best, or not necessarily the best. I'm not saying whoever is best, but some of the biggest courts in the country.
Okay.
And built it for their needs, built it for their requirements. And then after we successfully onboarded them and delivered the solution that they needed, then we started building a more self-service version for the smaller courts.
I like that, because if you can serve the bigger ones and have that name recognition, that a lot of the smaller ones are going to follow suit. Is that kind of the approach?
Exactly. And as well as if you have the right architecture. The justice system in the United States, at least, is quite a complicated, multi-layered network of independent and, like, just from an abstract technical perspective, not from a law perspective. It's like this interconnected, interdependent network of nodes where each node can determine its own rules and capabilities and configurations, and has its own control on its own data for a certain period of time. It can be quite complicated. Even if you can say the ultimate product could theoretically be something simple, the end result from, we're using a lot of different use cases, but essentially we just come down to a messaging application. But you have to send the right messages based on the right data, and make sure the right information is delivered at the right time. And when you're doing that in a complicated network like the US justice system is, if you get the architecture right from the beginning, at least at a statewide level, because we're not working on federal level yet, at least at a statewide level, then you can get everything top down.
Do you find yourself educating prospects? Educating government on here's how it should work. So, here's the process that we've developed, and get them to adopt that? Or are they still kind of creating their own rules, how they want to do it, and then telling you, here's what we want?
That's a challenge, I think, with any business. In order do you sell the horse? Do you sell the cart?
Right.
Do you sell the car? what exactly are you selling? I think it was who invented
Right,
Ford.
Henry Ford.
I think he had the famous quote on if I gave the customer what they wanted, I would have built a faster horse.
Exactly.
And I think Steve Jobs was also, famous with that type of approach of knowing what the customer wants. I think in our environment, the customer and the user is typically a bit more sophisticated. They may not necessarily know the workflow or a particular approach, but I think in most cases they know the goal, or they know the dream, the happy land, the heaven that they want to get to. They may not know exactly the range of possibilities within happy land, but they know that it's not where they currently are, and they can tell you what their challenges are. In some cases, those challenges ease is not necessarily an attribute. It's feasibly possible to address that challenge, at least with a solution like ours. In those cases, if they see value, then you become like a permanent partner for them. And I do understand why you end up having those long-term 20-year contracts by these legacy vendors.
Sure.
But I would just expect that the government customer continually puts pressure on the vendor to improve their product.
So working with a lot of legacy technologies, how have you worked with them? And do you work with them? Do you work around them? Do you work through them? What types of scenarios have you experienced?
Well, as part of our initial development, we actually put a lot of emphasis on being able to work with legacy systems. And so nowadays, if you're going to build a new software product, one of the first things you do is build an API and make it interoperable with other systems.
Right.
If not, that's the backbone of your system. Unfortunately, that wasn't the best practice in the 80s and the 90s, and even now, it's not necessarily the best practice. And if you want to be anti-competitive, you don't have to do it. Nobody's forcing you to. But our approach, we did do the API approach, and then we emphasize even more our file processing. So most of these legacy systems, they export some kind of file. They have some kind of capability to export data.
Right. The old CSV.
And so whether it's CSV or there's some interesting formats that come out, but essentially it's exportable data, and we created a process that they can use to essentially create automated data feeds. And so that's majority of our users either use that approach, and some will do the real-time API integrations. And so we really designed it so that essentially a case with a court is, it could have court dates, it could have your tickets, it could have your documents. And so we designed it to be as flexible and abstract as possible, so that it can fit really all of these case management systems.
No, that's smart. So having that interoperability, whether it's an API or whether it's whatever type of flat file they're producing, I think that's it helps them.
It also gives you good insight onto like the particular weaknesses that they have in terms of their own design, so that you can design a better architecture from the get-go.
That's really smart.
Yeah.
So when you're pitching at the state and the local level, how quickly are those decisions made versus what you thought it would be in the beginning, and what has it actually been? What has that experience been like?
A really good question. What I thought it would be was maybe 3 to 6 month typical sales cycle. What it really is again, maybe COVID is a different factor, but I don't think so anymore. It's more like 12 to 15 months, at least from initial first interaction. I think there's some sales and marketing strategists. I'm on the technical side, but I think some say that you need like 7 or 8 touches.
Right.
And I think it's a bit more with government. You're building the trust, you're building the credibility, and then you're showing the capability, and then it's a matter of pricing and bureaucracy, and also in some cases, at least in the US, and at least when you're working on a local level, they want to see that you have other customers in your same state. So that can be a challenge when you're trying to enter a new state. You have to sweeten the deal in some way.
Isn't that crazy? You can be working with the exact same type of court 10 miles away across the state line. That's not good enough. We want somebody that's in our backyard because we're different, right?
Exactly. And remember, in between states, I mean, there's some legal terminology like a foreign and extradition. There's some terminology where the states kind of look at themselves as different countries in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thinking about it that way.
And it's understandable for a government employee. They're not a business owner. They don't have a stake in the business. They're not going to get bonuses. They're not. I mean, maybe they might get bonuses, but they're not going to get some kind of dividends or something like that from the business. It's risk mitigation. They don't have much upside other than keeping their job.
Right.
Maybe looking good for one day. Because you do a press release and maybe they go on a local news. If it's a successful implementation, but if it's a failed implementation, which statistically, I think the federal government had a statistic that was like 82% of, may need to double check that statistic, but the majority of government software projects, at least federal ones, fail on their initial budget and scope and goals.
I think that's probably pretty accurate. Maybe 80% would be low because it is really, really rough.
Yeah, and they could lose their job.
Right.
So
yeah, the downside is big for them. The upside, making no decision. What are you going to do? Go to a different court? Yeah, so it's not like they're worried about satisfaction.
And the value is also like, typical B2B values, saving money, making money, being better than your competitor. It's not the same with government. You might have a little competition with a neighboring agency. And we are trying to, use that energy in our own product by creating like comparison features. But really, it's about risk mitigation. It's about addressing issues where they spend a lot of labor, a lot of time. You can't necessarily tell them about cost savings because cost savings is just going to go back into their general budget. And depending on the government agency, like for most courts, if they're seen as an expense on the general budget. So if they spend less money, it's not going to go back into the court's budget.
Correct.
It's going to go back to the main county's budget.
Yeah, if they don't spend it this year, then they don't get it next year.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Exactly.
Our tax dollars at work.
Yeah. Our tax dollars at work.
So how have you solved that? Multi-channel, multi-language. I know that's something that's a challenge for a lot of courts is, particularly multi-language.
Multi-language is a difficulty. A lot of local courts, especially it really doesn't matter what part of the country, whether it's urban or rural, you'd be surprised there's diverse communities. You may not necessarily be surprised, but there's diverse communities all over the country.
Sure.
And it's historically been like that. I was working with a new court recently in the state of Washington. And I was just researching the as part of our profile, the language diversity in that particular city. It's one of the last gold mining cities. And they had hundreds of languages in the 1800s.
Wow.
Because they had indigenous, they had dozens of different languages from Europe. They had people coming from Africa. They had people coming from Asia. It's always been a diverse country, at least in terms of the population. And if you're a user of a court, it's not dependent on, or if you're a user of government services, at least if the government services are not specific to citizens. Like if you're going to get arrested, you're going to get arrested essentially through the same process. If you're an illegal, you may get deported in a separate process, but at least initially, everybody's treated as an equal user. And in those cases, you should be able to have, at least routine cases. You should be able to get the communication in your preferred language, because it saves a lot of costs. Interpreters, the courts spend more than $38 billion a year just on interpreter budgets.
Wow.
And that's our tax dollars at work. There's no reason why we can't translate routine forms and documents and steps and procedures into at least a few common languages.
Sure, that makes sense. I don't know if we'd have 1,800 languages, but certainly there are a lot of commonalities. And you could probably cover 95% with just doing a handful.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we do support the top 22 languages, and some of our courts they want to support more obscure languages, or not necessarily obscure, but less common.
Sure.
And that's just because in their particular community, it's highly common, and sometimes, maybe unfortunately, new immigrant communities sometimes have a higher interaction rate with the local government, and there's no reason why we can't, spend pennies to translate and literally save dollars on the back end in terms of putting more human resources and people to avoid issues that could have been avoided from miscommunication.
No, that makes sense. Communication is so important. So what you're doing is super helpful to the community and to the governments as well.
Absolutely.
So tell me about the portal and how that is rolled out.
The portal, actually, we everything that we do in terms of our product is meant to be accessible. Accessible in terms of when you're speaking of like a website or an app,
Right.
It means if someone is hard of hearing or has limited vision, that it's still accessible to. They don't need any kind of special software. They don't need any kind of special training. They don't need to download anything. And so we make it as ease of use as possible, multilingual, mobile friendly. It works on every device, whether you're going to open it on your phone or a big giant monitor. It knows who you are. You get direct access if you need to speak with somebody or communicate with somebody at the court. It gives you any of your associated events. You can, like your upcoming court dates, you can add them onto your calendar, any needed documents. Everything is all built into that portal without having to deal with another app that you install. And it's only limited time. And so once you're done, you're done. You close it out and it's finished.
So what's been something that you've rolled out, a new feature or function that you really didn't envision in the beginning, but the product has grown to include that?
Scheduling. Scheduling.
Interesting.
Absolutely. We're doing all kinds of scheduling. So the ability to reschedule your court date, the ability for attorneys to schedule sessions for their own clients, rescheduling, canceling options. Sometimes they may send you a court date. The court schedules it on their end, but then they give you limited option to reschedule. So we've been doing a lot of scheduling capabilities, also around drug testing, random scheduling, bulk scheduling, that kind of thing. And our product we started with text messaging and email. Of course, my vision from the beginning has always been a full unified communication platform. So now we have built-in video meetings, we have built-in chat. You can send a letter or a postcard over US mail over the product. One of our next big features is going to be self-pay, where you can, right as it is, we probably notify maybe $1.2 million worth of payment notifications every month.
Okay.
And that's continually growing. We only started that in the beginning of this year. So you get a link that ends up redirecting you automatically to the court's payment portal if they have one. If you've ever paid a ticket online, it's a horrible experience in general.
Right.
They usually charge you a pretty high convenience fee or some kind of processing fee. Sometimes that could be egregious depending on the particular vendor that the court chose. So that's another option that we're adding to be able to do the self-pay and also be able to choose payment plans. So if the court allows it, you say that you're limited lower income, you may have to pop in a few financial income survey type questions, and then that'll give you the no interest, no added fee payment plan option to pay off the ticket or any other fines.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, I guess the feature that we weren't really expecting before CourtDate, I was very much a services and a consulting. I had a web development agency. I worked with all kinds of customers, of course, small, medium business, enterprise customers. I also worked with a lot of government customers, United Nations, also defense contractors. And of course, I naturally gravitated and ended up liking working with the government users more. I found more value and impact from that. And I think that the feature that I wasn't expecting was to build in a service. I very much love having a product and delivering a product that can be used by theoretically an unlimited number of people. I previously hated delivering services and working on an hourly basis, as a freelancer for people. And I really wanted to get away from that as my own, in terms of my own professional development. But we did add a service feature, so to speak, because you can automatically translate your content, but we also have an option to translate, to request a human translation. But then, that's from our own team, so that's not something I'm doing personally. So I'm happy to build that in.
Oh, that's a great idea, especially if governments are spending billions of dollars a year on that. Why not?
Yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting market. Right now, it's not really intended. We don't have enough translators to be able to have like a super fast turnaround. Imagine if you're in the middle of a court session and you need a almost instant human translation. We're not there yet in terms of the translation network. We can guarantee essentially a 24-hour turnaround.
Okay.
But that's used for if they need to send a message or if they need to send a document. We haven't figured out the ideal pricing for it. So far, we've been offering it just built in, ad hoc as needed. But I think that could be an interesting marketplace in the future for local translations.
So what motivates you as an entrepreneur?
Solving problems.
That's a good answer.
No, just beating competition.
That's good.
That's the only thing that matters. Beating somebody.
Yeah.
Whether it's competition or somebody that told you can't do it, or whether it's yourself that told you can't do it, or thought that you can't do it, beating somebody or beating some goal.
So in building the company and going after government, I know that you've got that experience in your background. So it wasn't just coming in cold, like no experience with government at all. How did you decide whether to go after funding or to bootstrap the company?
I considered taking on investments initially, just in terms of using it as a strategy to build a company. And I think taking an investment may make sense in a lot of cases, especially in cases where it's capital. If you're going to build a new fusion reactor or a new plane or a new rocket ship, you need a lot of money. And maybe a similar concept for a lot of different startups. With software, depending on the use case, I think the budgets can be relatively more controlled. At least if you have a technical background, you can define what you want, what you're going to build. Like if you're going to build a house, you never built a house before. You're not an architect. You have zero experience with construction. A house is going to probably cost you 2 to 3 or 4 times more than it would have somebody who has experience building houses.
Sure.
And who has maybe a network of builders that they can rely on, who he or she trusts, and they can get things done and a lot quicker and a lot faster. So I think I had a natural advantage for that, and I didn't see a need for investment. Secondly, I was starting when the investment times were quite frothy. Maybe it's not like that anymore, or maybe it's died down a bit now. But that didn't seem. I'm not a fan of the build fast and the Wild West and the gold rush and that type of mentality. I'm very much, if I'm traveling, I'm very much a slow traveler. I'm not going to flash around Europe in 2 days. It may take me a few months. So the same concept of the business. It takes time to build a product. It takes time to learn your users, to learn your market, to understand what you need. Sometimes an investment, I could say now we have a better understanding of the market. Probably closer to, I don't think anybody's ever at 100% product market fit, but probably closer to that nirvana. And so I could probably take a certain amount of capital and put my financial hat on, my rough calculations, and say, okay, based on investing in this sales acquisition channel, on this channel, on this channel, and combined with these features, I think we can translate this to, X dollars in annual recurring revenue within 6 months. And have that based on our actual previous numbers. You could theoretically expand what's working. or what's almost working, with capital. But I think if you take capital when you don't have something that's working or not, you're just not there yet. I think that poisons the fruit, poisons the tree, so to speak. And whatever you're going to create is not like, how are you going to create something if you didn't actually talk to your users because you needed to build something that they were going to pay you for?
Right.
And otherwise you were done. Because when you have $1 million sitting in the bank and you have 0 users and you're an engineer, and we've seen it happen 1 million times, you end up building what you want.
Right. Yeah, not something that has been proven in the market that the clients want to.
Or if you're a salesperson, you chase some fancy sales objective. I'm not going to name the particular founder, but I was speaking with a startup recently, and they're working on a social network, and great idea, and I'm sure they can find success on it. But they put this insurmountable goal of saying we want 100,000, maybe even more, minimum daily active users before we start trying to monetize this user base with advertisements. I'm like, find something else at least that you can do in the interim to create revenue, because if you're not creating revenue almost from day one, then what are you doing?
Right. It's a hobby, not a business.
It's a nonprofit.
There you go, nonprofit. There are way too many of those out there. I think maybe that's changing a little bit in just the mindset, but we'll see.
Agreed. I think that changes when it's lack of capital. So I think the reduction in easy capital is generally a good thing.
Yeah, one of my favorite books is Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. He was the co-founder of Pixar. And one of the things that he says in that book is that constraints breed creativity. And so it's having those constraints, not unlimited budgets that you can do ridiculous things with, but having those constraints forces you to be creative. And I think that's really true as an entrepreneur, especially bootstrapped. And you have to be creative, you have to be scrappy, you have to find ways to succeed, not just throw money at problems and hope they go away.
Absolutely. And you quickly find solutions. If you're on a ship and the ship is sinking,
yes,
you're not talking about, hey, let's go build the second ship that's going to take us further. Right. You solve the problem.
You plug the hole.
You plug the hole. And I think that's what a startup is. And a lot of people get lost in the let me build another ship while my existing ship is sinking strategy.
Yes. Oh, that's really, really good. Good thought there. Great analogy. So what role have mentors played in your success?
I'm not necessarily the nicest person interpersonally. I'm quite, focused on whatever I'm focused on at any given time. I'm not sure if I've had mentors in the traditional concept or in the traditional sense. I guess I've had certain people that I've always, whether I knew them in person, in real life, or just followed them, in the world, that I've respected and that I've found inspiration from, whether or not it's something that's relevant to me. I think you can always find inspiration from people working in all kinds of fields, sometimes from surprising fields. I'm also excited because I recently started mentoring startups with Village Capital. I started a mentorship program there, and I'm mentoring a few startups that go through their annual cohort.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and prior to CourtDate, I actually did not as a job, but I volunteered to do coding workshops where I taught different groups on, just coding in general, developing prototypes, developing software.
That's so important. I love that you're giving back in that. What have you learned from mentoring other people?
It's the real world experience that people are actually interested in and find value in. And I think a lot of times people are accustomed to listening to other people who have credentials that were given to them by institutions because they check different boxes and they didn't actually experience whatever it is that they're talking about or the field that they're in. They don't have real world experience from it. And I've been quite surprised, always feedback from different workshops that I've held of what people found valuable things that I'd consider common sense.
That's really, really good. So if you could go back and tell yourself something, back at the beginning when you started, what would that one thing be?
Don't work as hard, take a break, sleep more.
I like
You can
that.
start a startup later. Yeah.
So why would you say that? Why would you say work less, sleep more, take more time?
I think sometimes I think there's a certain breed of people that always want to start a business when they're young. And I was really quick to want to do that. And, I was always selling things. And when I was growing up, I was finding different ways to make money on my own. One of the first things I made was a phone card, because back in those days, I don't know if you remember with VoIP.
Yes.
You remember making phone calls with Skype?
Yes.
So before Skype came out, if you wanted to make a phone call to somebody, even long distance, not just outside of the country, that can be quite expensive.
Right.
So I was making my own phone cards and selling them to different people, and I think I was always just in a rush to get into business. I was in a rush to start something, and if I'm going to do something, essentially for the rest of my life, then I might as well take a break when I'm younger.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So have you always been entrepreneurial that way? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that something that, were your parents entrepreneurial, or is that something that's really unique to you?
I'm not sure, actually. My parents are not entrepreneurial. My father is more of a writer personality. I think, I'm also technical. So with being an engineer, developer, I think there's a lot of correlations with authors, whether fiction or nonfiction and coders. I think there's a lot of similar parallels in terms of work and mental process. I think it's the same brain, the same muscles, maybe it's just different education.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And so, yeah, my parents are definitely not entrepreneurial.
Mine either. But, it's just one of those things that I got the bug and I can't let it go. I can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, they're quite confused actually why I torture myself constantly, and I claim that I could get a job if I wanted to.
Yeah, but why would you want to, right? It's more fun to create one. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, where can we find out more about you and about CourtDate online?
You can find more information on our website, CourtDate.com. If you are a government agency interested in our product, we also provide online demos and completely free of charge. You can also check us on LinkedIn, CourtDate. I'm also active on LinkedIn under my own profile.
Awesome. And we'll make sure and link all of those in the show notes. And Ibrahim, really enjoyed our conversation today. It's great talking with you.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Ibrahim for coming on the show and sharing your journey and insights. Learn more about Ibrahim and CourtDate at eCourtDate.com. As always, links, highlights, resources, full show notes are available at SaaSfuel.com. Subscribe or follow us while you're there. And everyone who subscribes this week will receive a get out of jail free card, valid at any municipal court that's using eCourtDate. That's one of those things. It's a must have for anybody with a lead foot like me. Yeah, I'm not as bad as I used to be. What? I'm not. I didn't say I was good. I'm just not as bad as I used to be. So I don't know if that applies to you as well. But I think we could all maybe use that a little bit. Join us on Thursday for our SaaS Fuel Expert Series, where I'll talk with Christopher Nelson, author of From No Dough to IPO. Christopher is an experienced technology executive, 2 IPOs. He's a real estate investor and the principal and co-founder of Wealthward Capital, a real estate investment firm. Christopher teaches leaders how to achieve financial independence, even beyond the exit. What do we do when we exit with that cash? Well, Christopher has some great insights for that. And our founder next week is the one and only Nathan Latka. Many of you know and love Nathan, founder of Heyo and now Founder Path, which provides insight metrics and millions of dollars in non-dilutive capital for SaaS founders. So be sure and check that out next week. And until then, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.